problem of occasional excessive use of force by law enforcement officers is as controversial an issue here in Israel, of course, as it is in the United States, especially when the victim belongs to a minority community. Well, today saw another such incident involving the fatal shooting of an Arab man said to suffer from mental disabilities, which occurred in the port city of Haifa. Well, for more on that, let's go to our defense correspondent, Daniel Tzemach in Tel Aviv. And Daniel, tell us about this incident today in Haifa.
Right, Calev. So we are talking about an incident involving a 33-year-old Haifa resident who was actually reported to the Israeli police by his mother. His mother said he was having problems and she was concerned about his well-being. And ultimately, from what we even saw through video footage of the incident, when police arrived at the home, they say they were attacked by this man who wielded a knife and then were indeed opened fire towards the suspect here. From what we understand, according to security sources in Israeli media, there were 6 shots fired. If we look to the police statement here, Calev, they say, and I quote, that a preliminary investigation shows that police officers who arrived at the scene identified the suspect and tried to arrest him. And after the suspect tried to stab them, they shot at him and neutralized him. One of the police officers was lightly injured during the course of the incident. According to Israeli police, Calev, that injury was sustained to one of the police officers who was scratched in the face, but we are talking about what appears to be at least 6 bullets that were fired towards the suspect in close range, one who was known to have had mental illness. So there's obviously many questions, and as you mentioned, Calev, especially charged given the fact that we are talking about violence towards an Arab resident or Arab resident of a city that oftentimes Haifa could be the example of. Here, of course, not the case, as we're seeing this violent altercation that is again surfacing some of those very sensitive issues for those local residents and, of course, the family of the individual who was killed here.
Right, and there does seem to be some points of comparison to an incident that occurred in Jerusalem, for example, and also some of these cases, especially members of the Ethiopian Israeli community, have raised in recent years.
Right, Calev, and you're already hearing that from representatives of the family, from people close to the family in today's incident. But maybe some of the most stark examples really not too long ago, just in the last 2 years, maybe the clearest example that really mirrors this is actually an example from the Ethiopian community. A young man named Yehuda Biadga, who also was reported to the police. The police received a call from a close personal acquaintance to Yehuda saying that he was acting in a way that was dangerous and that he also was suffering from mental health issues, armed with a knife, but again was shot and killed. That case really prompted or propagated, you could say, protests against police violence, against police brutality. Another example just within the last year and a half or so is a clear one. It's been a benchmark for a lot of the protests we've seen, social protests, Calev, is Iyad al-Halak, who was a autistic Palestinian resident of East Jerusalem, who went to school or was really went to a nearby institution. He was in that area. He was running away from police and was shot and killed unarmed, as they appear to have thought he was a terrorist. That was not the case today. There was appearing to be no concern whether or not this was a terrorist act, as it does appear as though the police were notified in advance regarding that this individual posed a threat or that he was mentally unstable, and not that there was some sort of nationalist motivation here, but definitely many questions, and there is a gag order on many of the details pertaining to this incident, not least of which has to do with the police officer involved, who has been investigated by the Israeli police.
Right, and we should note, Daniel, this does play into some of the political debate going on, especially among the Israeli Arab community. On one hand, they want police to be more active in fighting criminal violence but in the community, but then you have the case of there are some tense relations historically between the Israeli Arab community and the police, and here the victim again, an Israeli Arab.
Exactly right, Calev. There's no question that this does strike at many sensitive issues, and it's happening at a time of tension, especially when you mentioned the Arab community, maybe more when it pertains to violence within the Arab community. And as you mentioned, in certain areas, we've seen very rampant protests. Al-Fahim, Haifa even had its fair share of demonstrations. So there's certainly a concern that this could again surface these sort of tensions, and there could be some sort of response from the local communities or residents throughout the country.
Right. We should should note Haifa, within the Israeli context, generally known for good relations between the Arab minority there, the Israeli Arab minority, and of course the majority population. Daniel Semach in Tel Aviv, thank you for that.